Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse recently hit theaters and has made quite the splash. Spoiler alert, if you have not seen the film, please skip this episode. I loved this movie so much. I wanted to dedicate an entire episode to doing a deep dive into the movie. I've invited none other than my favorite co-host, Oscar, to join the Spider-Man aficionado, Pete Critchett. Pete owns my favorite local comic book shop, Paper Asylum, in Beverly, Massachusetts. He has also been an avid reader and collector of comics for decades. Anytime I have a comic book question, Pete is my go-to. And as you listeners know, I am friends with a lot of comic creators, so this is saying quite a lot. This was such a fun conversation. We dive into the themes, production value, and the art of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I am so fascinated by all of the insights Pete was able to share and absolutely had a blast in this episode. Listen on for a fun time with Pete, Oscar, and I to hear about all things Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I'm loving these conversations and hope you are too. If you are, please rate my podcast on your platform of choice and share it with others. If you would like to support with a donation to help keep this podcast going and support the work I do, you can become a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com/SifuMimiChan. For comments or suggestions, and especially to give me your feedback on Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, you can follow me at SifuMimiChan on all social media. Now, on with the show. Hello, Pete.
Hello.
There are many times where I say on my podcast, because I have so many comic creators on, you know, my favorite local comic book store, Paper Asylum out in Beverly, shout out. And so now we have you here with us. And Oscar's here with us too.
Yeah, well, we only bring in Oscar. He's the big guns, so we only bring him in for the most critical reviews and commentary.
No. Here's the main point. The main point is that I have been there in the background when you and Mimi have been having conversations. I've been so thoroughly entertained. I was like, you should have recorded that conversation, because when Pete goes off, I was like, wow, that was awesome. That's the point.
All right. Well, you yourself were a big comic book reader at one time in your life, so I know that for a fact.
That is true.
Yes. That is the bond. I think one of the first things you guys shared was oh, and Pete's like, well, let me tell you.
Well, no, it's more like, yeah, I love comic books. And then Pete's like he pulled the curtain back. I was like, oh,
no, I love comic books.
And you're like, no. Yeah.
Well, because there's people who enjoy comics and really like comics, even, dare I say, collectors. And then there's Pete.
Yeah, right. Pete's what we call upper echelon comics collector.
I call it no joke. But welcome back. We've had you on the show a few times. It's been a minute, so I'm really glad that this actually panned out, because we all got in a little bit of a conversation about the excitement. Wow, I'm going right into it, over Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and it's just been like wildfire. Anyone we've spoken to has been so psyched about this, and all positive, but in particular, we're really excited to talk to you about it, because for those that don't know, Comic Book Pete, or, Spidey, as we call him, yes, he owns Paper Asylum in Beverly, which is, by the way, although it's, I don't know how many thousand miles away, my favorite local comic book store, and the place of which I like to go and buy my comics.
Thank you. That means a lot.
So, well, it's all true. It's all true. But you also are what we consider Spider-Man aficionado kind of level, at least.
Right. I mean, I guess the right thing is let Pete explain his start with Spider-Man, because that. Oh,
yeah. So maybe just give us a little bit of a snippet of here's why I love Spider-Man.
Yeah, I think it was just it is that sort of iconic. I mean, who doesn't love Spider-Man? I want to know, I think it's just one of those things. You grow up, you meet him in cartoons on TV. He's in comic books. There's there's merchandise everywhere. I mean, I had web shooters growing up, like in the 70s. Like it is just, my guy, and of course my name is Peter and Peter Parker. You self-identify in weird ways, but that seemed to be, another thing. And just a normal kid having normal high school, college, problems, sort of the Charlie Brown of the Marvel universe, if you will. And it's just something that I think Stan Lee really set out to create characters in the Marvel universe that had an appeal, something that, DC had its gods with Superman and the Flash and all of that, Wonder Woman. But Marvel really had these sort of from the street characters where you could identify with, Peter Parker's sick right now and he's trying to, fight Green Goblin, or he's going to be late to, school or something like that. And it was all relatable. And I think that just clicked for a lot of people, myself included. And so, yeah, it just from there, it was like, all right, that's my guy, I'm Spider-Man. I'm not Batman, I'm not Wolverine. Those are cool. I like those characters, but I'm Spider-Man, you self-identify that way. And so, yeah, I think that was just part of my love of growing up and meeting him in comic books. And yeah.
And you really took that to the next level, though, because you also ended up working at a comic shop and then you also collect, and you can go ahead and show off and tell everyone that you have the very special, in its thermal, the temperature controlled first appearance of Spider-Man.
Yeah. No, I do own, it is true. I do own a copy of Amazing Fantasy 15, which is Spider-Man's first appearance. It's the first time that Stan Lee put him, in a comic book. And I had the privilege in 2015, I believe, Stan Lee came to Boston Comic-Con. I think it was 2015. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. And I had it at that time. I had Stan Lee sign it. And so I had a really fun experience. Another podcast maybe for that, but great experience. And so I do own it, and it's lots of fun. And I do bring it to the shop occasionally. And it's just, I got to say, it's just fun to watch when people come in the shop. And if they know that cover, if they recognize, Amazing Fantasy 15 or AF 15, we call it. I don't care if they're 60 years old. If they see that, they are 12-year-old again, and they're like, oh my God, and, oh, you want to hold it? Like, here, take a picture with it. And they're like, what? Oh my, they all freak out. And it's great. I just love having that response or seeing that response and reaction to something again. So it's not just me, right? It's everybody who sees it, like you could be a 6-year-old kid, you can be a 60-year-old kid. You have that love. That character just has that iconic, impression, I think, on people. So it's just great. Yeah, it's just great.
And now, fast forward in time, there's been so much evolution in comics, and what do they call them? The canons, and then they reboot and they do this and do that. But now, as you and I spoke off air, and, you also kind of were at the start of this journey with me where you're like, yes, talk to this person, talk to that person when it comes to comics, because of Oscar, developed a love. But of course, I've had Bendis on, and we talked about Miles Morales, and
sure,
how just revelatory that was for people maybe like Oscar, right? In Brooklyn, growing up, seeing himself reflected as someone as iconic as Spider-Man. I mean, maybe you want to jump in on that, seeing Miles Morales, but of course, Bendis had a lot to share, and people can go listen to that. But
yeah, the thing with the Miles Morales character, specifically with him being of Black and Puerto Rican descent, this is a joke. This is a joke that I can tell because we went to see Trevor Noah, and his opening act, I forget the comic, but he was a Puerto Rican comic, and he said, he goes, I'm Puerto Rican, and my wife is Black, so I guess that makes my son Dominican. So it was so like quick, and I just started cracking up, and then you hear about Miles Morales, and so that whole self-identifying, I was like, oh, that is. Right. I'm like, that's me right there.
Because you love Spider-Man.
I love and Pete would know more. I don't remember exactly, but I think it's called Spider-Man: The Assassination Plot, which was with like Todd McFarlane was drawing.
Yes.
That was the first comic that I ever bought.
Oh, really?
But it was a trade. And it was the first, like, with my money, bought a comic book at a store, and that was that one. And I think your point of DC has their gods, like the Pantheon.
Yeah.
And like the Justice League of America is like the pantheon of the gods. But your point, I never thought of it that way, but it's so true that Marvel made it more your everyman.
Yeah.
And the fact that they did not just your everyman, but also now really showing like, wow, this could really be me. That was, and it was huge. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Really awesome.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the power of inclusion. I mean, we throw around these concepts of diversity all the time, but I mean, it kind of chokes me up a little bit when I see it. The first movie, especially when, Miles Morales is sort of swinging at the end of Into the Spider-Verse and he says sort of, you can wear the mask, it's just like, it hits me every time I say it even, I get a little emotional because it's just like, yeah, that's exactly what Stan Lee wanted to do for, the Marvel Universe. He didn't want it to be this sort of straight, white, cisgendered, environment that maybe that's sort of the majority of it, but they tried along the way, and not always with great success either, like they're not I wouldn't point to Marvel as sort of the shining, example of how to be diverse, but I would say that got to give them some credit, right? They did attempt to bring characters on, and Bendis, I mean, alone has like all the characters. I mean, if you look at some of the characters these brought in and introduced at this point, like he's really trying to add to that diversity across the board, not just at Marvel, but even over at DC and other places. So yeah, no, it's awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah, 100%.
I guess I'm also sick of just looking at white guys, like,
but and you and I talked about this off air, on air, not just white guys there, but like in comic book shops.
Sure.
Right. Like that used to be the dynamic. It was a very specific demographic.
It was a very gatekeepy, place to be. And if you looked like me, you felt very safe going in there and saying whatever the hell you wanted to say. And we still encounter, that person. They still come into our shop, but they quickly realize that we don't particularly speak that language, in the shop. My customer, my customer is, an 8-year-old girl, like she's just as comfortable in my shop as, a 60-year-old man, and that's where we want to be, right? We want it to be for everybody. It's not meant for one particular group, it's meant for everybody to have a safe space and like express their fandom, express their excitement for their fandom, whatever it happens to be. It doesn't have to be Spider-Man, so I think that just also emanates in terms of the Spider-Verse, right? It's so like, I think we'll probably get into it in terms of how many different characters and cameos made an appearance in just this movie, the second movie. But, again, I think that's also part of that showing how cool it can be, right? To have all these different characters. There was a T-Rex at one point that showed up. Spider-Rex, comes through, and it's just like, okay, like.
It was, okay, so we're going to dive in because like, This is what I mean. It's like, now that we see what these characters can do for anyone, right? Whether you're an adult, whether you're a child, but like just seeing yourself represented, that's one thing, but also just the joy of these films. So obviously we didn't really dive into the first one. I didn't rewatch it, but what you just mentioned was just, that's the theme. That's the key. It's just like, it's so beautiful. It was so entertaining. Oscar could not stop watching it. I mean,
I think I've rewatched that movie more than any other superhero movie.
I mean, and I think it's that connectivity that we just talked about. And so going into the second film, it was like, man, you got big shoes to fill. Like, wow, we really love that first film. We didn't hear too much about the second one. We didn't overwatch trailers. We don't go online and read reviews or any of that. But we had a couple people who said, you're going to love it. I'm like, enough said. So just for our listeners, total spoiler alerts. If you have not watched the second film, do not listen.
Oh God, yeah. We're about to wreck this.
We're about to go.
Turn this off. You don't want to be here.
Go. So the first person I text, have you seen Spider-Man into Beyond the Spider-Verse or not Beyond? We haven't seen that one yet, but Across the Spider-Verse. And I was like, I need to know what Pete thinks because I need the Pete seal of approval. And so I text you and what'd you think of the film?
I think that's definitely one topic is definitely reaction. I kind of broke this down in my head, probably there's going to be a lot of talk about the art style, right? And then probably we'll probably talk a lot about characters and cameos and things like that. And then the production value of it, I think that sort of bleeds into your reaction too. So I think they all sort of tie together. But sort of my reaction was, well, that's the greatest movie I've ever, that's the greatest comic book movie I've ever seen in my life. Like that's amazing. I think there was 2 points where I realized like I'm in this and I'm having so much fun. And that was the movie starts and you're doing this whole action sequence with Spider-Gwen, right? And the Vulture and all this stuff. And it sort of is all happening. And then you get introduced to Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099, and then Jessica Drew shows up, Spider-Woman, and they're fighting and da-da-da-da. And that all ends. And then the credit, and then the title of the movie. That was 20 minutes in. We were 20 minutes in the movie, and they hit us with the opening title. And I was just like, all right, here we go. Like, that's what you start with? This movie's insane, and then I'd say on the back end, right? So we're coming to the end of the movie. You kind of feel like something's happening, and you see Spider-Gwen again, Gwen Stacy, she's getting her team together to go save Miles or whatever, and it builds up. The movie's building up. The music's building up. There's this big crescendo. There's the big group shot at the end. And I'm like, no, they're not going to do it. Like, this is exactly how a comic book ends. Like, that's the last frame. And then you say underneath that, what do you say? What do you say, Oscar? What's the last thing at the end of a comic book?
To be continued.
To be continued.
Yeah,
and boom, fade to black, to be continued comes across the screen. And I'm like, yeah, man, I am so in. Like, that was perfect. And everybody around me, all the kids, all the moviegoers, they've never read a comic book in life. They're all like, what the fuck was that? Oh, that's bullshit, man. Like, I can't believe we got to wait now. And I'm like, I'm just smiling and I start chuckling a little bit. I'm like, yep, never read a book, never read a comic in your life. You don't know.
A series of books.
You don't know how this goes. That's the feeling we had every single month reading the Spider-Man comic book.
Yeah.
What's going to happen next? Right? Oh my God, he's in peril. Like that whole thing. You're just like, so I heard that in the theater and I was just like, yeah, that's perfect.
So I would say there's 3 parts. I agree 100%. That first beginning, the fight scene with Gwen, and then the music, I was like, while watching it, and we watch movies and I usually don't say anything, but I was like, just tell me, I was like, this is amazing. I just kept whispering, this is so freaking dope. And then the second part for me was when he was on the train and he said, Spider-Man 29 has him on his back and he goes, nah, I'm going to do things my way.
I'm going to do things my way. Yeah.
I could feel the chills. Like I don't even have hair in my head. It's just like, ching. And then that at the end when like, I just was like, oh, I see what's happening. This is going to be continued. And that is freaking awesome.
Yes.
And to be continued. We couldn't believe it.
Yeah. It's amazing. Like, so that's it. Those three parts, I think about it all the time.
I think it's really funny is my reaction to it. The movie gave me the space, right? It led me along to that moment. Like, I don't know if you guys saw the recent Dune Part 1.
Yes.
But I didn't know that was a Part 1. I thought I was going in to see Dune, right?
Oh, okay.
So we're 3 hours in and I'm like, man, we're only here in the movie? Like,
they're going to wrap it up.
Fade to black. Part, coming next or part 2 or whatever, or end of part 1, and I was rip shit. I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, no, I was not prepared. And I know. It's my fault because I didn't read it. It said Dune part 1, like little tiny part 1. Right? I could barely see it on the screen, right? Like, so I didn't know going in it was a part 1. So that going from that reaction to be continued, right? And waiting now for Beyond, it's like night and day. And you only get that reaction because it's not like I hate part 2s. It's like the movie did that. The movie, the way it was made, gave me that, and it relied on the fact that, I know how to read a comic book. I know the beats. I know the steps that happened here. And I just, so that was just great. I thought that was just an amazing piece of artistry, that they pulled off.
So yeah, yeah. But listening to the crowd around, I was just like, you don't read comics. You don't read comics. You've never read a comic. You don't know what a comic book is. You know, like it was like hilarious. You know?
This is the type of stuff that Pete's really good at because we both saw Dune also, which was actually a good movie.
Yeah. Oh, great movie. Yeah.
But it didn't give you that same feeling, right? And it just speaks again to the quality of these Spider-Man movies of how they just make you feel that.
Yeah, and it's so guttural. It just reaches deep down inside of you and it's just like shaking you around, like feel this, right?
Now, I would say one thing, because we're talking about reactions. I had a stronger reaction to the first movie. Why? Because I had never seen anything like it before. Yeah. Nothing like it before. This movie is like 10x the first movie, but I didn't have that visceral reaction to it. I knew already what I was going in. Like, even if you said to me, we use the same production, we use the same animation, we didn't change a thing, right? I might have been like, oh yeah, no, it was a good movie, but that first movie, when I first saw the animation style and everything they did, it just had that impact. This movie ramps it up. I mean, they do amazing stuff with the art styles and everything. But I just feel like there are going to be people out there that are going to be like, the first one's better. And they're not going to have a real good reason as to why they think that. And I just, in my heart of hearts, I have a feeling that it's the first time they've ever seen something like that. And so they are responding to it's better because it's first, right? It's the first time. And they had that, whoa, their reaction to it was just over the top. And then they got to this one and they were just sort of like, yeah, that's the same. It was a good movie. It was the same, but it felt the same, So I don't want to shut anybody out by saying like, oh, I like the second one better than the first one, because the first one's amazing, But I think the two of them do stand in their own respective places,
I don't know. I'm kind of seeing it as now they're together. Right. I feel like because of the second one, I'm seeing how the first one needed the second one. And I'm like, oh, now I know there needs a third one, obviously. But that's the beauty of this, because there's so many part ones, part twos, but even things that are like to be continued, or they give you the little end credit, blah, blah, blah. Like, you don't feel like they really need one another. Like this becomes, oh my God. I didn't know I was missing this from my life, and that is so unique to capture from a filmmaking standpoint, right? Oh, to just kind of have this codependency where it's like, no longer will the first one ever exist without the second for me. Like, it's so amazing. But you're right. That first time seeing Miles Morales come into his own and just seeing Miles Morales come to life. I mean, those of them people who've never read the comic also wouldn't have known, like, oh, this is a thing. And speaking of which, okay, we are introduced to a zillion different Spideys, and we go into the verse, and it's just outrageous. I mean, the first one alone, I'm like, Spider Pig, and I'm like, what?
But that was an actual thing, right? Spider-Ham,
Spider-Ham, Peter Porker, Spider-Ham,
So I'm just like, oh, okay. The first one, you're getting these other Spideys, and it's novel and it's fun. And then this one, you're just like, oh my gosh, they're everywhere, and it's so much. So how many of those are made for the film? How many have appeared in different comics? Because I am not in the know. I mean, and I'm asking him, and he's always like, ask Pete, because he's like, I know some things, but this is like.
Yeah, I think the only one that I'm going to say is movie magic, right? Is Jessica Drew Spider-Woman. And the reason that I say that particular character is that character is an amalgamation of two characters, okay? There's Jessica Drew, who is a white woman in the Spider-Woman comic books, and pregnant at one point too. However, they made her black in this movie, and that is an homage to one of Marvel's first black female spider characters, or superheroes in general. Actually, she precedes even Storm in X-Men. So there was this little comic book that came out in the 70s called Spidey Stories, I think, and it was in partnership with a TV show called The Electric Company. And the Electric Company had Spider-Man, live action Spider-Man. They do little skits or whatever, but they made a comic book. And in that comic book, they had, what was her name? Valerie, I think. Valerie the librarian. We never even learned her last name. And she wanted to fight crime, but she was just a normal person. And one day, because Spider-Man would, web sling around the New York, and sometimes he would keep his clothes in a bag, like a web Spidey bag, and hang it from, some place in the city. And one day she's walking by and the bag fell down in front of her, and she opens it up, and there's a costume and web slingers and all this stuff inside the bag. So she dons the costume and becomes Spider-Woman for the first time, right? And nobody knows this. Like, it's not a
right.
Nobody cares.
I'm not pretending to know.
You've lost 90% of your audience.
No, I think it's fascinating.
It's
because
true. Nobody knows
history that we don't know about.
Right,
and
right.
the little nods.
Yeah. So it is this little nod, this little homage to this character that was just a throwaway, and they brought it into the movie. And I think that was kind of fun and original to see, because as she comes in, we meet her right away in the first 20 minutes of the movie. She busts through a window with her motorcycle and all this stuff. And, she's, I don't know if they're married yet, but she alludes to the fact that her husband or her boyfriend is Miguel O'Hara. So you get that reference there too. But yeah, it was just great. I was just like, oh my God, this is fantastic. I loved it already. But after that, I mean, I got to say, pretty much everything else you saw on the screen was a cameo of a character that is used in the larger Spider-Geddon, environment for the most part. And it was just the coolest thing to see all of the little cameos. There was a Spider-Man with a brown grocery bag over his head. I'm like, it's Bagman, things like that, where you're just like, you don't even if you've been reading the books, for long enough, you recognize some of them. And then some are new, like, Spider-Punk, Obi Brown, he's from 2015, man. Like, I don't know enough about him. He's more in today's kids' realm than mine, like, I didn't grow up reading about Spider-Punk, and even Spider-Man India, he was, I think, 2004, 2005, again, long after I had stopped actually getting every book and reading every side. Like, it was like a 4-issue, 5-issue limited series. It was like, yeah, Spider-Man India. Yeah, that's cool. I think it's just interesting how they brought in all those different characters, and I loved it.
Was there any Oscar that you saw that you recognized from your historical references in your brain? Because everything felt so
I
new
think
to me.
So I didn't follow Spider-Man that long, right?
Right.
Even though it was the first thing that I read, I went, and Pete and I have talked about this. I went into a deep dive into X-Men.
Yeah, you did X-Men. Yeah.
But so I feel like who was the one the Spider-Man who was always brooding and posing?
Oh, Spider-Man Noir by Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
Voiced by Nicolas Cage. Yeah.
That in the first one, but in the second one, the one who's like, at the end, towards the end, he's like, okay, now I'm going to strike a pose. And
that was Ben Reilly.
Right. So is that
by Andy Samberg?
So is that
Yeah.
This I'm not sure of, but I feel like, is that the one who was like a clone of Spider-Man or something?
Yes.
See,
yes.
Wow.
So that's a total guess, but I know
Not
only
a guess. You got it right.
But I only know that because it was like there was something, and you might have mentioned before. It's like, yeah, so apparently like they're trying to make that all the 30 years of Spider-Man at the point was just a clone. I don't remember all of it, but things like
they tried to throw us off, right?
Yeah.
Because back in the day, around issues 121, 122 in that range, in the 120s of Spider-Man, which would put us back in the 70s, they tried to do this story of like, I've cloned Spider-Man, but it started off like I cloned Gwen Stacy, right? So all of a sudden there was cloning technology was getting thrown around and back then. And so we really never knew, like they told the story and we figured out there were clones, and they tried to bring that back in the 90s as sort of, they call it the Spider Clone Saga or something like that. And I just remember it was like, oh, here we go, and it was just awful because they were trying to do too much stuff with, at the time, they didn't have a Spider-Verse.
Right.
Hadn't really established it. So they were like, am I the real Peter Parker or am I not? Like, am I a clone? Am I not? So they try to do all of that. I think they even try to bring back Peter Parker's parents at one point, and they were clones or something.
Yeah. So I never followed that, but I do remember, I think back when I was buying comics, I started buying some of the 2099 stuff.
And that's kind of what led us into more of the verse, right? So we can get away from the cloning and we can say, oh, no, they're just from a different dimension, right? And now you open up Pandora's box.
Oh my God.
Whatever you want now. You know,
Oh
you
my
have a cat be Spider-Man, doesn't matter, you know? So this is great, you know?
I mean, it was just so it was just so funny, that whole scene when he's running through the verse and you get to see and meet all these other ones, whether it's just like a quick, like with the cowboy or with the guy with like all the arms. He's like, what, something on my face, you know, just like,
yeah,
it's
no,
the best.
I mean, shout out to the producers who like really went the extra mile too and fought for which I'm sure was going to be tough, but I mean, like, think about it. They got Andrew Garfield up on the screen, just using a little thing. They got Toby up on the screen. They got the Uncle Ben's up on the screen there during
Donald Glover.
event. Donald Glover was there. You know, a live action Prowler. Like, how cool was that to see him in the suit finally? You know, the Spot. Remember when the Spot was like trying to figure out his spots, and he opens up one and he goes into like one, and then he pops out of that one, and the second one he goes into, that's the convenience store from the Venom movies. That is Mrs. Chen's convenience store, played by Poppy Liu, I think. She's a great actress. But that was in Venom and Venom.
We never watched the Venom movies.
So he pops into that and he has that conversation with Mrs.
and she's like, so
Chen. And I'm like, holy crap, that's from Venom, right?
See, there's so much
J.K. Simmons. We heard his voice as J. Jonah Jameson. He's like, oh, Spider-Man. We heard him. Oh, they brought back Mahershala Ali to play Earth's 42 Uncle Aaron at the end there. That sort of twist, you know, we can get into that. So, like, yeah, man, they reached out to a lot of people to make those little cameos happen from live action and from the previous voice acting movie, you know, and I thought that was just fantastic, you know, to do stuff like that. So animation, bringing in all, and that's the other thing too, I'd say, that again, that, and maybe it's part of the conversation around, you know, the production is like animation is just doing things that live action just can't and can never probably do. Right. I mean, we've gotten so close in the last 20 years to all the Marvel movies that have come out since Iron Man in 2008. Right.
Yeah.
And there's just been this upping of the production value of these Marvel movies and superhero movies in general. They're able to do things now that they couldn't, you know, back when they did, you know, Batman 1989 or something like that. But yeah, I think it's just amazing that they're able to do all of those different characters and bring all of those different styles in on one movie. It's just a smorgasbord of, you know.
I know, it's like, it was so much. So we did go back and see it because it was like, we need to digest this. We need to get this right. And so I do want to get into that a bit with you. But before I do, I wanted to ask you about the issues that it's like this person, like all those issues that they slam up on the screen. Those are all real issues also.
Those are, and it was even funny if you noticed.
Some of them look so made up, you know. You're like, wait, is that real? Or
no, I mean, they even had AF-15 floating in Miles's room. I don't know if you saw that when he was on the bed and Gwen Stacy comes, you know, ports in or whatever, and he's kind of, things start floating and levitating in his room, and Amazing Fantasy 15 goes across the screen. I'm like, you know,
you're like, I have that signed.
Yeah, that was pretty funny.
You know, what's funny is the room was really key because the second time around, I completely noticed it was a different bedroom. Like it was so obvious the second time around. And then you realize, wow, with the art and how they're doing things and all the other colors, like you don't really notice it. It's so brilliantly done.
Well, they did things like they told us in the first movie things that they revealed in the second movie. And if you go back and you watch it now, you're like, son of a bitch. Like, I don't know if you remember that in the first movie, there's this big fight scene in the collide, like Miles stumbles into, he goes down in the sewers or wherever, and then he looks and there's a side room and he gets all of a sudden the Green Goblin, right, gets thrown through the window, and there's a big fight between Peter A. Parker and Green Goblin. They're fighting in the collider, and that's, where Peter Parker dies. Kingpin kills him, right? It's during that scene where Miles meets Peter Parker, right? And they have a conversation. They bump into each other. As they do, the colors on the wall behind Miles are purple and green. Purple and green, the Prowler colors. Mm-hmm. And it bleeds to blue and red behind him as he has his conversation with Peter Parker. The colors behind Peter Parker are always blue and red, right? And so little things like that, where they're already telling you, like, nah, he's supposed to be the Prowler. Like, they told us, like, in the first one. And so when he shows up, and remember, the spider that he gets bit is from Earth 42, right?
Right.
Then he gets sent to Earth 42, and sure enough, there's Miles Morales in that dimension or that verse as the Prowler, right? And it's just like, they told us way ahead of time. They told us, it was crazy.
That's the thing.
Things like that. Things like that is what just adds more. It's like
layers.
Like you're eating this delicious meal, and it's like, oh, you put this has that in it. Oh, I didn't even know. I was enjoying it the entire time.
Yeah,
and
also even just like the watercolor effects that they always use around Gwen Stacy, Spider-Gwen.
Yeah.
Depends on how she feels.
Yeah, and it's this very pastel color around her, very washed out, and then her father, a little bit harder edge, different color palette for him, and then the two of them hug. Right. And everything just goes wide out and the color scheme changes because it's a combination of the two. You know, when they have this embrace, I think they hugged twice in the movie, but that second one especially. And I just love the fact that, they played with that sort of background like that. It was just fantastic,
I think, I'm not a psych major or anything like that, but I'm pretty sure they did their research into like emotion, color equals this. And it's just so layered in and so well done. They're helping you emote like even more so. So it's the music. Usually you're seeing something and you get music, you get acting, you get, what's happening. But this, they were also able to like draw in this artistry and this, what you see in a painting kind of thing. And then just like make you see it in a way of which like normally Oscar and I stare at art. We're like, it's nice. It's very dark on the, we don't pretend to know anything about art, but like we've been privileged to go to so many wonderful museums and there are things that evoke feelings and you're not sure quite what, but this is just like, very in your face, but in a way of which it's like they're taking you through the emotions without you even realizing you're being manipulated.
Well, I think it's okay that you're being manipulated.
No, it's good.
But
it's a good experience.
So
like, it's just like, whoa.
Yeah. So the magic of like that movie, you can call it art, right? But the magic of it is you don't have to be able to explain it. Mm-hmm. You just have a feeling, right? Like we went to the Louvre, right, in Paris, and we would see stuff. I have no idea what type of painting that is, but there are certain paintings that you watch and you go, wow, this gives me a feeling. And this movie gives you a feeling. Yes. And what's really cool is then afterwards you go back and you can think, well, why did that give me that? And it doesn't need to be a professional opinion. It's the way that you feel about it, right? Like, your point of the first movie of what is so spot on of like when one, you see yourself represented if you're a person of color of going, wow, it doesn't matter. You don't even have to be a person of color. You see yourself represented. And then when he says you wear the mask, that to me is the best part of that entire movie.
Oh, yeah.
And then when we look back and come back for the second movie, I was trying to think, why is this so freaking impactful? It's everything that we've spoken about, but there's also like, you can see yourself in so many characters. Right. You see yourself as Miles Morales as like, I was a teenager who was like battling a little bit with parents, but my parents, knowing that my parents love me, knowing that I love my parents, but you still battled. You also, even though we're all part of the NBC club, right? The No Babies Club, we know what it's like to mentor kids. Right. And we know that feeling of like, man, I really want the best for them, but they may be not ready to hear what you like. All of those things is where you look back and go, this movie, we keep saying, right? It's just an amazing movie. So
right. Yeah. I want to just pick up a very small point that you mentioned earlier about between the different cultural connections that you had. That Miles Morales that we know and love, being Puerto Rican, sort of Afro Latino, and then when they get to meet the second Earth 42 Miles Morales, and he's the Prowler, that's placed by that voice actor is completely different from Shamika plays the other one. He is Dominican born in the Bronx, and I think it's Gerald Jerome. He's Dominican and of Latino African descent. I was just like, how do you nail this so perfectly?
On every level.
On every level, right? On every level. I was just like, oh, this is great. So I love the fact that that came out in that way for those characters. I thought that was perfect.
And even that part of like you can look back, and this is me saying like knowing that, right? That Prowler, that Miles Morales is not a villain to me yet.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's so cool because you're like, all right, well, this is the circumstance that led him to where he's at.
Yes.
And so again, on another context, it shows like that is me. Like, I could.
So that could have been you.
I could have been you. Correct.
That's
I could have been the hero, or I could. And it's just all these things. Again, not you. You're watching it. You can't define it as you're watching it, right?
And
but you feel it.
I think there's a lot of people, and maybe even some that are listening, today to this podcast, who might look at that character, the menacing, he's up on when you first meet him, he's up on that beam and he drops down in the costume, he's, just sort of like all this, and he takes the thing off and he's got braids in his hair, and it's like, oh, is this supposed to be like thug life, kind of thing? And it's like, nah, that's a style. You don't recognize it. You didn't grow up around that. That's not like, that's just cool to wear your hair like that. That doesn't necessarily denote, he's a thug, right? And that's not what they were even going for. They were going for, give him his own style, right? And that's how he was raised. And he came from this culture and all that kind of stuff. And I was just like, yeah, that's really cool. And he never says he's the bad guy, right? No one ever identifies like, you're the bad guy and I'm the good guy, right? There's this very fluid idea about what is good and bad in that moment, And so I don't know. We could see the two of them maybe working together in the next movie.
So it could go that way, right? It could go like they're working together, or like it could be that Prowler is the superhero,
right?
That could, but it could not also. But I just look at that and I go, now that I'm thinking about it, because I remember I had this real reaction when I saw that Miles Morales, and I was like, oh, I see Miles Morales that I know. That's me.
Right.
That Prowler, that's my brother.
100%. I was going right.
And I was just like, oh,
that's your brother.
And you can't judge them as good or bad. They are just who they are based on all the circumstances that led them to that point.
And they did a really great job of showing that exact thing, because we see Miles Morales in, I don't know what Earth number, but like the one that we all see on screen.
Yeah.
The party for his dad, his family's all around, there's food, there's community, and it's a Hispanic party we've all been to. Like Jamaicans are the same way. Like I have been to that party. Like I have been late to those parties. We have brought food to those parties. Like you get this culture and this sense of he's in a place where he's loved. Their parents showed up to his principal or counselor meeting. He's supported. He's got all this stuff. And then you see only 5 minutes of the Earth, 42.
Yeah.
And you immediately know she's doing this on her own. She's struggling. They don't have enough to make ends meet. Uncle comes in, gives them a little money. You feel all of it.
Yeah.
There is just, and you see the darkness of the city, how there's poverty, which leads to crime, which you could just feel the change in that very brief moment. And Oscar's, it was spot on. I knew where he was going with this, because it's like, Oscar, just being a year or so older than his brothers, was able to go on one path. Mm-hmm. And his brothers were in Brooklyn doing the other path, it's like the Earth 42 path. And you're just kind of like, well, we know they're a good person. It's not that they're bad people, but know that with darkness and with circumstance comes your situation. And it's like, who puts you in that situation? I mean, it is just a lot going on there for a cartoon.
But it is, I think it also is the overarching theme, right? Because even when, Miguel O'Hara and all the Spider-Verse is chasing Miles Morales, and he's there like, nah, I'm going to do my own, attitude. Think about it. They all are looking at him as the bad guy, right?
Yes,
he's the one that So it flips on flips. Everything is sort of like building in different ways. So how you look at a character, he could be a bad guy, like if he goes back and saves his dad, is he a bad guy for breaking the Can of Ant and destroying the Spider-Verse and all that kind of stuff? And now is Miles the bad guy, like that kind of thing. So yeah, I do think that they flip the script and make you think about it in certain ways.
Well, even the guy that leads the Spider-Verse,
Miguel O'Hara.
Miguel O'Hara, yeah.
You meet him and you're like, oh, here they come in.
He's the bad guy, yeah.
But then you're like, wait, is he bad? Is he good? Is he, it's complicated. He had a family. It's to everybody.
Yeah, and even going back to the first movie, right, with Kingpin. Like, what did Kingpin really want? He's the bad guy, but what did he really want? He wanted his family back. That's all. He loved his family so much, he didn't care how much money it took. He didn't care what he had to do. He was going to kill Spider-Man to get his family back. Like, okay, like, shoot, if I'm in that position, is that me too? Like, am I the Kingpin for wanting the love of my family, my wife, my daughter, my son, whatever, back? Like, you just don't know until you're in that situation. So I do feel like they do play on that morality, a lot in these movies. It's just a load of fun. To watch. So
let's talk about expectations then now, because the bar has just kept getting higher and higher and higher. And, they end on this note where, our hearts were just beating out of our chest. You were psyched to laugh at all the moviegoers who've never read a comic. We were just kind of like blown out of our seats. Like, first of all, we didn't know it was going to be a to be continued. So it was so awesome that we got that experience. As I hope people who watch it get the same experience. But now it's like, oh man, are they going to be able to keep at this pace?
So
I've got hope.
I feel like, all right, let's go speculation real quick.
Okay.
I feel like the whole idea that the dad has to die is what do you call it? A red herring, right? I think it's not true. I think the mom dies. Why? Because I just feel like, well, first of all, I don't even know that the dad is his real dad. Mm-hmm. I think that's his stepdad. I feel like in the first movie they alluded to it because of the different name. The last names changed between the first and the second movie. And so I don't get the sense that he is Miles' biological dad, right? Oh. He's the father that raised him, but I do believe that it's not his real father. I could be wrong. So taking him away out of the equation, I don't think that does the story any justice. You take the mom out. Look at all of the interaction between Rios and Miles, right? It is heartfelt. You got to promise me, Miles. You got to promise me, wherever you go, you got to promise, and you got to bring a cake, and all this stuff. She is his heart, right? You take that away. That's
the canon event.
That's the canon event. That's the canon event that they are like. Notice how it's all about the dad, right? They're making you think it's over here. It's going to be her, right? They're going to take her out. And I just
would be heartbreaking.
Well, every good Disney film does that. Like, kill the mother, take the mom and lock her up. And, Dumbo. The Dumbo did that to me in 1980.
Well, just to not to tangent too far, but that speech of wherever you go, make them know that you belong there.
Right.
To me, oh my God, because I went from my school in Brooklyn to a private school in Queens, where I felt that. I was like, whoa, do I belong here? Like all these people are smart. Their parents are rich. It's just like, I don't know, man.
Looking at you.
Yeah, everyone's like, yeah. Where are you from? No, you don't live there. They didn't believe that I lived where I live. And that, so I don't know. I'm tending to agree with you because I remember watching that part of the movie and being like almost like wiping a tear because I was like, that's how you do want to feel. You want to feel like, no, I've earned my right to be here. Right.
That
was wild.
So we're calling it now, on this podcast. Mom's Diary is out, in
July 2023. Pete's
that's right. So I have a feeling that could happen,
that's heartbreaking, but it would make for the most impacting.
Right.
It's true.
And they even try to they even try to like again steer you away, right? Because of the big fight, that's happening with was it they were fighting the Vulture at the beginning, those first 20 minutes, right? No, it wasn't that. It was when the first fight with the Spot. And the dad's helping, and he's running about them, and he's hanging on. He hangs on the board, and it breaks, and he's falling, and you're like, oh no, he's gonna die. It's like saved, like, nah, man, you can't kill him. You can't kill him. So and then so much of the plot revolving around like, well, and then they try to throw you again with like, well, my Spider-Gwen, like Gwen Stacy, my dad's gonna be is captain. But he stepped down, so now he's not going to die, because he's not the captain anymore, right? It's like, so now like, he can't.
His dad's becoming captain and all this.
Right.
What about Spot? I don't know anything about this character, and it's
he's actually an awesome character,
brilliantly played by.
I think they did that so fun. Because I think they just did it in a fun way. Because he starts off as, comic books, right? Villain of the week means something to us, right? Because every week, every month, Stan Lee's like, or whoever the editor at the time was, if it was Ramita or
it's the Pretender,
Jim Shooter, whoever was, who had to get the books out, like, all right. Who's got ideas? We need a new character. We need a new character for, Spider-Man to fight. Is the villain of the week. Like, it totally is. Like, and then never again. Like, you'll never, like, the Spot never makes another appearance, ever, And not only that, the Spot isn't even introduced in the main Amazing Spider-Man title. He's in that secondary Peter Parker's The Spectacular Spider-Man title that nobody read, right? Like, because it's just like, we need to tell more monthly Spider-Man stories. We'll just spin off another title. So the Spot shows up over there because they were out of ideas, and they were just like, give us a villain of the week. So the Spot is totally that. But again, they tie it back right to the first movie. He's the guy that gets the bagel whipped at him, right? And he hits him in the face, and bagel across the screen. That's the Spot. That's the dude, right? And they even tell you like, oh yeah, he's working on all this technology. And then, right, he figures it out. Like, I got these spots from this, so I got to just develop a little bit more of this, this power. I'll go and I'll do it in my apartment. And he builds himself up into a true adversary, like a real baddie, by the end of the movie. And he's coming for vengeance. He's gonna take it out on, Miles at this point, and everything that Miles loves, So you go from that, really funny sort of bodega fight scene, to, world shattering, world ending power and coming after Miles. So it's great, it's great. And I'm really happy that they could do that. Again, I think it's like Kevin Feige, right, over in the MCU. Like, here, let's give a machine gun to a talking raccoon and make the tree say, I am Groot, and, $1 billion, like it's one of those, things where it's like they just take the things that like nobody cared about and they make us like, go, wow, that was really cool. So yeah. Magic time at the movies, it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's, it ties in a little bit to this, but I've been listening to Malcolm Gladwell's Revisionist History, which he's got a great podcast, right?
Oh yeah.
And I haven't listened to it in a while. I'm talking about like maybe 2 years, but I'm like, let me listen up. And I just happened to listen to an episode just today where he was talking about how much he hates endings, because he goes, all right, as a writer, or he goes, what is up with all these people in Hollywood? They spend so much time, obviously, group thinking the beginning. How are we going to start this thing? And he goes, as a writer, I think about all the time, how do I start it? And he goes, but then it's like you shit the bed when it's time to end it. It's like, all right, let's just wrap it up. He says that happens too often.
Yes. Okay.
And so to Mimi's point of like, how are they going to end it? I really don't feel that when this much thought has been put into not just the first movie and the second movie, that they're gonna
like,
mess up the ending.
They have it planned.
They have to have put so much thought.
Good shows, you can tell the ending was always as is. They had it ready, and then they built it to get there.
I mean, you've had conversations with
Rucka.
With Rucka, where he's like, I know where I want it to end. I just got to land the plane, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like I got to stick. And I feel like this is I think just from you explaining, hey, this is what happened in the first one, and here's how they must have been thinking. They've obviously know how they want it to end.
Yes.
They just got to stick the landing. And I feel with the success of it, it has to, right? They got to stick the landing.
I'm hoping they do, because if they do, it'll be the greatest trilogy of all times, you know, for superhero movies. Nothing's ever going to be able to eclipse it, I feel, because it's just that good. You know?
Is that good.
I do want to sort of lift up the rug a little bit, you know, and just mention, while we're talking about sort of production value, how grueling the schedules were for the animators that I've heard. And that's not to detract and say that it's a bad movie or anything like that. I think their efforts really made the movie what it is. I just think that perhaps, you know, the director or the producers were very sclerotic in the sense of just like, let's just tear this all down and let's rebuild it again. And then the next day, you know, the same idea. They were very in their heads like, no, that's not really what I had in mind. Do it this way. Not really valuing. I mean, I'm sure they do, but again, not really taking the time to appreciate what their ask of the animators was at the time. And, you know, just really just sort of these guys just really working hard, you know, and then of course, who gets the spotlight but 14-year-old Preston Mutanga, you know, and nothing to take away from him, you know, and his dad buying him a computer and then him doing all the animation for the Lego scenes, you know, like amazing, right? Like a 14-year-old did all that and they included that in the movie, and, you know, they had to work around his school schedule and all that kind of stuff. It's a fantastic story. But again, that's sort of one bright point and fun thing about how the movie was produced. I think really, if you were to talk to some of the animators, like, I'm sure somebody got divorced, you know, I'm sure people didn't sleep, you know, for
100%.
You know,
this goes back to the people really driving and working on the film, not really getting the credit they necessarily deserve, which is why we have a Writers Guild and SAG strike right now.
Yes, exactly. So just want to say, you know,
100%.
I enjoyed the movie, but I think shout out to the people who really were, I mean, just pouring blood, you know, to get this thing on the screen.
They must have. Yeah, they must have.
Yeah, crazy.
And you know, and you do always wish and hope that production can go smoothly, but that's like, you know, an impossibility in the world of filmmaking. But at the same time, it's nicer when a studio supports you, and then that doesn't put pressure on the director and the producers and the you know, people making the decisions, and then it can trickle down, which is exactly part of the problem that we're having now. It's like the people that are making the money, getting all the decisions, and then like the credit of the studios and stuff. It's backwards, right? And you're right. You're right.
There was some skit that I saw, some video skit I saw online where it was like a Disney animator talking to a Sony animator, and the Disney animator was like so laid back and chill and was just like, oh yeah, you know, we just crank these things out. We just, you know, overlay. We use the same technology all the time. And the Sony guy is like just shoveled and like, you know, worn out. He's like, it took us 2 years just to design, you know, Hobie's guitar, you know, and it's like, I haven't seen my wife in 3 months, you know, like, my children don't know what I look like. Like, it was literally, it was a nice comedy skit that they were doing, you know, but again, the underlying, you know, reality being like, the Sony guys just, they killed it. They killed themselves to get it, to, you know, to come out the way they did. And so props to them again, you know.
100%. And I hope there's, you know, a lot of accolade for them down the line, because it's phenomenal in so many ways. But the animation is actually one of the things that cannot be overlooked in this.
It's such a good point. Like, it makes you think, okay, when you had one artist doing one painting, how many of them were so dysfunctional?
Right.
Like, not just to put out great art sometimes comes at the cost of so many things, but I guess I never thought of it. This is that times thousands. Right. Because not one person can do it, but all the ones who are killing themselves for it, we get to benefit. Also, and I think it's a good point to think about that.
Yeah. And also the nature of artists is on artist time, but the nature of artists working for a big comic company or a studio or a thing, or, you know, you're not on your time. You don't get to just be creative. You have a schedule, and then you've got other people waiting to take your job if you don't want to get it done. And it's,
I mean, if you talk to
totally different
Greg or anybody, they'll tell you, like, especially the artists, you know, they're trying to bang out like 30 pages in a month. They're trying to get a page
Yes.
done a month if they can, and then they got to ship them off. And if an editor makes a change at the very end, it's like crap. Now I was trying to work on this other page, but I got to go back and I got to redo this. It's a nightmare.
Greg is always sharing not that writing isn't hard, but it's like he's like, I get my thing done, but then it's going to take Michael X amount. It's my Lazarus shout out today. To get that part done. Like it's just you can't physically do it. It's just time consuming and tedious.
By the way, I'm guaranteeing you, they were like, Spider-Man will return in 2024. Ain't no fucking way.
Not gonna happen now.
Fucking way. No way. There's no way we're getting that movie. If they do, you're gonna find out like the body count on this next movie is gonna be like in the double digits, easily,
If they
it was secretly done already.
If they can keep
in the can
the quality, then let it take 20.
Yeah, I would rather than push.
Take as much time as you need.
Take as much time as you need.
Put out the quality stuff.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. That's
the
just
techniques, like I said, from the first movie to the second movie, it's a 10x improvement on techniques that they used and introduced and made. Like, imagine if you get another 10x on that on the next one, right? Of new techniques developed. And, they were talking about going on the 2s for Miles Morales. And then Hobie was like on the 3s and the 4s in terms of frame rates and stuff. And it's like, what is going on? Like, the technical stuff is lost on me, but no joke. It took them like 3 years to come up with Spider-Punk's look on the screen, just
but
crazy.
It was 5 years between the first and the second. Get it that we want to quench our thirst by throwing this thing down next year, but hey, listeners, Studio, Sony, take your time, get it right, don't rush it. But with this strike, honestly, SAG-AFTRA, we started the strike yesterday, and I really think with SAG and with WGA together, it'll hopefully expedite things because it's a really big deal. I don't think people realize what's about to come down the pipeline now with this. Everything stops. People can't go to San Diego Comic-Con next week to promote their films. You can't even post on Instagram to promote your show. So it's beyond just filming and getting and editing and getting the work done. This is a big deal. So let's see what happens. And
shout out, the other thing too, I feel bad about that. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about now, but just even some of the actors over in Europe, who are doing things like filming the next season of Game of Thrones, and people are like, oh, they shouldn't be doing that. It's like, whoa. That's a different union. They have to work, right? They're not part of they in solidarity. Yes. But if they don't show up, that's a problem for, the union that's, hired those particular actors. So it's not all actors are on the same, in the same organization at the same time. So I think it's going to be, I think the next couple of weeks are going to be interesting to see what happens. But, time to catch up on One Piece. There's 1,000 episodes in that anime. So I'm set, baby. Let's go.
So this is I was thinking the same thing because Mimi was telling me about SAG and what Writers Guild. And my thought is what's fair is fair. People should fight for what they think is fair. Sure. And then at the same time, I also have the feeling of there's so much stuff out there. So us as fans should let the creators do what they need to do to get
100%.
That right
100%.
And not give a shit. Take as much time as you need.
100%.
Stuff needs to get. Who cares? We have enough. You guys have put out enough stuff.
Yes. We can lament the fact that I really wish I could see a new episode of fill in the blank. But at the end of the day, we side with the actors. We side with the writers. We side with the creators. We don't give a shit about some billionaire 60 floors up in a high rise because he's not getting his residuals. Get out of here. That's
Right. It's totally ridiculous. And I think people don't seem to understand because they look at these big studio actors even, or, the writers that get Oscars, why do they need more money? And it's not that, guys. It's the imbalance.
They ain't getting any money to begin with.
It is the imbalance of power. Trust me. Not everybody gets, the paycheck of, the Tom Cruises and the whatever. That's a very small percentage. It's outrageous. So I think it's just, it's going to be fascinating. But any last thoughts on Spider-Man? Anything else that we didn't cover or share? I mean, there's so much, but this has been really exciting to get to hash out and just I fangirl out with you guys.
Yeah. On my side, I just always love Pete's take on stuff because he's really, so what Pete does is he says stuff that goes, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. I just didn't verbalize that, or I wasn't thinking it, but now, yes, that makes perfect sense.
I did.
So I always like
to ask also about, I loved the little mentorship of Peter Parker with Miles and the little baby, but just even that dynamic relationship, it's just like there's so many relationships in there that you kind of love and didn't realize you had missed. And how
just hold the baby, just hold the baby,
you know, makes you feel better.
It's
just I really love that piece too. So.
The Peter B. Parker, just introducing his daughter Mayday and just all that interaction. It's just, again, they can just have so much fun, and it's the only time Mayday's kind of crawling. I don't know if you remember this, is Miguel O'Hara is sort of grilling Miles at first, and Mayday's kind of crawling on Miguel, and at one point he catches her, and doesn't have really much of a reaction, but it's the only time you see him break just a slight little bit, of a smile because of Mayday, so even that is just hold her, even Miguel succumbs to Mayday's powers, right?
Right.
Yeah. I know. I think if there's a takeaway, I just think, fatigue. I think there's a fatigue that grows around any genre. And we've now had superhero movies more and more and more over the last 30 years, I'd say. And people are comfortable voicing oh God, not another one, and it's just become such a part of our movie going experience that there's always a superhero movie, in the theaters these days, or seems to be, right? And I guess I would say that I was expecting to hear Spider-Man fatigue, because again, like Batman, right? There's been so many Batman movies, right? And say what you will about them, and this actor was good, or I didn't like that Batman, he's a terrible this, and he's my favorite, and you can have the same conversation around Spider-Man. There's been so many actors who've played that character at this point. And I just thought, are we going to see that fatigue? And honestly, I almost feel like it's the opposite. A Spider-Man movie is announced and it's like a rush to really dissect it and get into it. And I think the character just has a little bit of that special nature where it's now generational, for a lot of kids who grew up around it. I mean, I have kids walk in the store. They've never held a comic book in their life, but they know Spider-Man, and they're excited to get a Spider-Man comic for the first time, but they've met him somewhere else, TV, a movie, a video game, something, their pajamas, whatever. And I just think that that's probably, what I would say as a final thought, that I don't think that we've seen the last of this. And the fact that they've got this verse now, it was one character and now it's hundreds, and I just think that is really, really awesome, for the future of that brand, for the future of that character, to really give people and that inclusiveness, to it. It's not something you could do with Superman, right?
Right.
Superman is Superman. That's it.
Yep.
You can't have, what do you have? Supermen? We can't do that, Batman. Can you have another Batman? Not really. You got to have one Batman pretty much, he's got to save the day. Spider-Man? No, you can have a ton apparently, and anyone can wear the mask. So I think that's
exactly,
cool, anyway.
Oh my gosh. Awesome. Thank you so much, Pete, for having this conversation with us. Oscar, as always, favorite co-host.
My pleasure.
All right. Until next time, everyone, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Let us know your thoughts and visit Pete over at Paper Asylum in Beverly, Massachusetts, if you're in the area.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to The Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.